Hey guys, Sam here from Guardrail. Super excited to sit down with Connie today, talk Web3 security. We've obviously met quite a few times before, Connie. We're both building companies out of New York. We're both building in the cybersecurity space between DevConnect, between ETC, ETH Denver. I think we have the chance to sit down and share what's happening in the space all the time. But I'd love to open this up and invite a few other people into our conversation. And I think what Olympix is building is really, really exciting. Love to get a little brainstorm going here. So, quick introduction about myself. My name is Sam. I'm the founder at Guardrail. It's a real-time security monitoring platform that watches your smart contracts, alerts you the first chance of any kind of threat, and then gives you automated incident response right out of the box with that platform. I'll hand it over to Connie to give a quick introduction.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me, Sam. Hi, I'm Connie, founder of Olympix. Olympix is a proactive security tooling platform. So we provide tools that sit directly in the development pipeline and allow individual developers to secure their protocol ahead of an audit.
Amazing. Amazing. So between Olympics and Guardrail, we've talked to teams across the whole blockchain space. Before we get to some of the more interesting thought topics, I'm curious, Connie, how did Olympics get its first customer?
Yeah, great question. So our first customer came via design partnership. One of our investors introduced us to the VP of security at said company, and we had a pretty standard conversation with them, just kind of laid out how we see the future of security evolving. He was very aligned, and we signed a design partnership. A design partnership essentially lays out, okay, if you complete these tasks and deliver on them, we'll pay you for said service. And then that contract has grown year over year as we've continued to grow and evolve and deliver new products. So yeah, I think the first customer is always such a special one to all of us builders, because the first person who kind of takes a leap of faith and believes in what once was an idea and they watch it become a reality. And then what's really fun from the founder lens is you get to watch it completely shift the way that they build and develop in the way that like you had always dreamed of. But without that point of validation of them signing and them first taking the leap, you would have never gone in there. So I know my first customer holds a very special place in my heart. I'm sure yours does too. I'd love to hear how you got yours.
No, absolutely. I love that. So leaning on your investors where you can to get your foot in the door, making it a design partnership. Love that
100%.
idea.
Right?
Love that idea also. It's such an underexplored concept of generally the advice is always, hey, don't give your product away for free. But when you're starting off that early, I mean, we did the same thing. We kind of just gave it away initially just to get as much feedback as we can. And I think the moment for us was when we
I
said, if we turn this
sorry.
off,
I
go
charged
ahead.
a little.
You
I
charge a
charged
little.
a
There we
little,
go.
but I just, yeah, yeah, enough to make it work it, that right. You want a bit of a vested interest in it. So
Yeah.
they'll explore, so look back, and yeah, you don't want it too high, but
Exactly. And then what I was just going to say is when you give them that chance to potentially cancel or take the product back, when you kind of watch the look on their face of, okay, what do I do now that, let's say, Olympics is not going to be here next month? That's when you realize, okay, you've created something that's actually valuable for them. It's already
yeah,
into their
100.
workflow. Very cool. Very cool. For us, I remember we were actually talking to a protocol that had been through a first hack. And right after the hack, they were working on their rebuild plans. And when they were planning on launching a V2, they had a pretty long list of action items that came out of the postmortem. And I remember talking to this team where they had a CTO and one other on-chain dev who had to pick up, months of work. So we were actually able to come in and work very closely with them, partner with them, almost like a person on their team and actually pick up a lot of those items off their to-do list. What was really nice is it wasn't something hyper custom that we built for them. What we ended up building for them is something we could just turn around and give it to like every other protocol out there. So being able
Yeah.
to hit that, give them the satisfaction of making a 6 month rebuild process 1 month felt really good. And then also being able to like use that opportunity to iterate like day in and day out with a team that was very driven and incentive aligned with us, but then also kind of bringing that over
Mhm.
to the next 5, 10 customers has been pretty rewarding. Definitely not our
Does
juiciest deal from a customer that we won so far, but I would say one of our best like design partners I've had the chance to work with.
does that customer continue to mold the roadmap, or
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And over time we've noticed we've I don't know if you've seen this at Olympics, but there's different maturity of customers in the Web3 ecosystem, right? You've got
100%?
the ones
Yeah.
that are fully decentralized focus and have strong opinions on chains. The other ones that are kind of watching the narrative and planning, 12 to 14 months ahead. So we've seen all kinds. We've seen the teams that have said we want security that no one can touch. It's bulletproof. We've seen other teams that said, I want like the most configurable, highly adaptive dynamic system. And I think that's what makes it really interesting about blockchain, right? We're so early in the ecosystem that our builders are experimenting with everything, right? Which chains to deploy on, how permissioned or unpermissioned to make things. It's a huge challenge for us in security, right? Because how do you secure everything, knowing that, yeah, the teams are experimenting at such a strong pace?
Right, right. And did you find a huge component of your sales process to be education, or when you started, was there already education about on-chain monitoring?
Right. It's a really good question. I would say we're now at the point in the cycle when I first started Guardrail, uh, I would say audits were a lot more prevalent than monitoring was for sure. Every single
Right,
team I knew
right.
was getting at least two to
Yeah.
three audits,
Well,
and monitoring was like on the optional list of if we have time, we'll launch monitoring. Fast
right.
forward from 2022 to 2024, I think we've seen so many cases where having good incident response saved you millions of dollars, saved your users, saved your investors. And actually, we're now at the point where even within the blockchain community, people can reference certain hacks as that was a good example of something that was well handled, right? The comms was on point, the reaction time was very short, and although there was some exposure, the exposure was not, uncapped. And then there's a lot of examples of the other side where, they didn't have the real-time controls and they were lacking the visibility. So for good or for bad, I think we've now been through a cycle of security awareness, but also monitoring awareness. So I think that's something that I'm pretty happy about is today we have teams coming to us to set up monitoring, and no, most teams I know would not go live today without on-chain monitoring. I think
That's
the part
great.
that's really interesting, I'm curious to get your thoughts on is, you know, how do you make a team feel like monitoring is working? Because they're not getting hacked all the time. Similar to an audit, sometimes you get an
And
audit
in
and
cyber,
they have right, and you let's say you get an
yeah,
audit,
how do
the
you put
code
it into
isn't
vulnerable when
vulnerable.
something is valuable is nothing happening? Right.
Exactly. If somebody's writing really good code, how do you prove them that the audit is valuable? Or in our case, if somebody's has good operational security, how do you make sure that monitoring is really effective? So I have my own thesis on this, but what have you found that's worked?
Yeah. It's like a time and true question in cybersecurity. I guess we both started our companies with the same problem in mind. Like, right in 2022, when we started, over 14 billion had been exploited. The single source of security was an external third party audit, which I know me and you are aligned that those are important and critical, and you should go for the best auditor. But we also are aligned, and I think a lot of the audit firms are too, is that everyone's human. Humans are subject to error. Humans cannot handle everything, and teams should have ownership of their security stack, and the audit should be treated as a third party advisor to security. They don't want to be your sole source of security. And for teams to adopt that, there's been different educational waves. My perception is that monitoring wave of education has come quicker than my wave. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'd say teams are more eager to divvy out budget for monitoring than proactive security. And so for me, in order to show value, there's a couple things we do. We actually don't run a traditional sales process. Our sales process is not let me ask you questions, let me see if you qualify, and then let me try and sell you my solution. My sales process is show me your pre-audit commit. Let me run my tools on it. Don't show me your audit. And on the call, I'll pull up my results. You show me your audit. And so a lot of times this works easily because teams don't have either haven't yet published an audit or they've gone through multiple audit cycles and they only publish one of them. So the later ones, they'll give us the pre-audit commit and then the first audit and we'll cross compare. And when there's overlap, they're often seeing the value in terms of, well, I'm paying 25K for that audit, right? And there's this other component of it, which is 90% of exploit contracts are audited. So an audit isn't foolproof. Again, not because the auditor isn't great, but because the auditor's human and human are subject to the time frame they have, to the day, to how much sleep they have, right? We're just human at the end of the day. And if you can find things that the auditor found, then perhaps I give them just a wee bit more time to find other things. Perhaps I give myself a wee bit more insurance, right? And that's often kind of the lever that moves people, the lever that moves the needle. I don't know the saying, but that's what gets people going, less so than
Mhm.
I want my team to own security and no security. Now, for more advanced teams that have been in the space longer, teams that come from traditional Web2, it often comes from, I want my team to have ownership of security. For more DeFi native, it's, I want to squeeze the most out of the auditor, fair, right? And I want to give
Mhm.
myself a little bit more insurance. And I imagine for you, the insurance piece is part of it as well, right? So I guess I'll turn to you to hear your answer.
Yeah, I mean, just reacting to what you mentioned there, I would say having that before and after for any product, but also I think in security is really important, right? You pick up a small sliver of the pie, don't try to do everything. You said pick up a couple of contracts, run a scan on them, and if you can show them that this is your day to day, but this is day to day with Olympics, I think that's a really
Mhm.
powerful sell, right? And we're both, the way I look at it, in a position where we're trying to make security proactive because we're making it continuous. Today, auditors are booked weeks in advance. You're paying per hour per day of the auditor time. But with Olympics, you guys can do the scans at any point in time, right? And it's all about making security continuous, just so that it's not something you build, and then secure, but you build, secure, and that's kind of how all software is built. The way I think about it, we've gone away from the phases of software where we used to have build time and then build freeze, right? That used to be a thing in the early 2010s, because that's how code used to be shipped. They used to have QA time and time that all code
Yeah.
is frozen.
Careful.
But now we live in the CI/CD world where code is being shipped every hour, every day. I think security can't be a bottleneck, right? It's got to be continuous. It's got to be, and that's where I would say, we're both in a similar camp where we're educating the market on making sure security is something that you're thinking, daily and weekly, not just, once a quarter when you're checking a box.
Yeah.
And I think
And I
taking
think
it
one
even
other
one
piece
step,
of it,
go ahead.
go ahead.
I was gonna say taking it one step further. We had recently we met with a team that's a publicly traded company in the US, and they're have a Web3 expansion. The thing that really impressed me is they've got a very mature security program outside of just crypto. They've got Web2 and Web3 very mature.
Yeah.
And the reason I think that that's really compelling is they've actually used security as a way of creating a safe space. So they do this with physical security, where the way to get into into the company and out of the company is very, very strongly gated. And although that may seem harsh to people on the outside, what it does is anything that's inside the company is very trusted, and they've created a very safe space for experimentation, creativity. And I would say that's the message I would want to get across to teams building in crypto is, if you do the work up front to create a secure ecosystem, a secure perimeter for your company, it really allows you to go really fast inside the company. You can ship code, you can make sure that what you're doing has really high engagement. It's almost the thesis of the whole point of security, so you can have breaks, so you can go faster. And I think we're seeing that play out with some of the more mature companies that we have that are using Guardrail, where by having Guardrail, they can launch on more chains, they can launch different kinds of products a lot more quicker, just because they know that they have Guardrail kind of behind the scenes. And I think that's a pretty nice, after for implementing a system.
Yeah, 100%. I think another piece of that, though, is we are dealing with a different attack surface. And I want to say it's net new, but it's not net new. This concept of a life or death stakes attack surface, meaning in the event that something goes wrong, it's catastrophic. Medical devices are the same way. Medical device malfunctions, not great. Plane, a rocket, right? Like these are all life or death stakes attack surfaces, and smart contracts are the same way. In the event that something is broken, misconfigured, interoperating with another contract, another network, and something goes wrong, your entire company, all the liquidity in it can be drained in seconds. And that's a crazy shift. And what's even crazier is the fact that people are still deploying despite the rate of things going wrong. And what that tells me as a builder and someone who cares about the non-sexy security infrastructure piece is like this is important enough to people that despite things going wrong, despite the major risk, they want to continue to innovate here. And it's not just individuals and little companies, it's governments. It's, like you said, publicly traded companies in the US that are willing to take on this risk and move to this ecosystem that is so risky because this innovation is required. And so like our job as security professionals is to just lay the groundwork, keep our eyes closed, stay behind the scenes and make it easy for them to do so. And I think that's a great privilege, right? I think the next 10 years, majority of Fortune 500s will be operating in some component on chain. I'm consistently amazed at how my customers are leveraging this ecosystem to innovate. Half of it I don't even understand. Like, I didn't realize you could tokenize that. I didn't realize you could do that. Oh, and then it enables that. Wow. Right. And at least I'm not so smart to come up and think of all these cases, but I am the one who can give the infrastructure that allows people to secure them and do it freely and be able to focus on what really matters when you're a CEO, which is like, you don't want security to be top of mind all the time. You want to have some sort of peace of mind with it in terms of like, I've put things in place to ensure my company and this isn't going to keep me up at night. And that starts with not just proactive, but also, I mean, what you labeled as real-time security. So there's I think that like a ruler stick, and it starts with when you're writing code continuously within the CI/CD pipeline. Then there becomes that kind of like static audit piece, and then there becomes the real-time piece. And every single piece is important. And if you miss one, you inevitably can screw yourself over. And I don't know about you, but every single customer of mine who has come to me has, once they've come to me, has never been exploited. And I think once the CEOs shift the mindset here and actually it becomes a decision in the same way, I'm going to make sure we hit our sales targets, I'm going to make sure we hit our product targets, becomes a decision that the CEO comes tops down, not bottoms up, the whole team shifts. And you can tell me if you've had different experience, but I have not seen any of these teams after being really rigorous and thoughtful about this undergo something like an
Hmm.
exploit.
Absolutely. I would say so much of it is finding out the right customer who's taking security seriously. And I would say the best ones are the ones that have kind of almost accepted the reality that it
Mm-hmm.
is a very tough challenge, and attackers are going to come after you. So if you come in with that mindset, the what you want to do is make it as hard as possible for them and make sure that you're not the one that they go after, right? And I think it's coming in with that adversarial
Exactly.
mindset of I could do it really well, but if I'm not talking about it, if I'm not making it clear that don't go after me, I've invested A, B, and C in security, then you are going to be a target. And there is obviously a lot of teams that have invested a lot in security and still continue to become a target, and that's why it's kind of what you were just mentioning there. It's not
And
a like
I'd be
one-time
curious
effort.
though, like, when you say teams who have invested a lot, I actually think if you dug deeper, you would see that they didn't actually invest in a full life cycle. They invest in a layered, one thing layered. So, for example, some teams will get 5 audits and they will still fail, but they didn't do proactive and real time, right?
Yeah,
So they over indexed and over budgeted for sure, but they didn't layer. And when you don't layer, you leave holes.
yeah,
It's putting the same piece of Swiss cheese with the same hole. You want different cheeses with different holes, so eventually, hopefully, there's nothing that's going to
yeah.
seep through.
And when you think about that whole security stack, right, the layered cheese model, what do you think is still kind of the most missing piece in that stack from your perspective?
Probably OPSEC. We need a lot more OPSEC, private key education. Yeah,
Hmm,
that's kind of where I'm seeing holes. What about you?
totally. I agree with OPSEC being pretty lacking. I also see kind of dependency risk and supply chain risk coming up more and more for us. People are, buying products without knowing what's, behind the scenes. So we've seen a couple of exploits so far with supply chain attacks. Like I think it was the Safari Club kind of extension attack all the way to attacks that happened very recently with the safe front end. So it's a very challenging situation because Web3 promises a lot of composability, but of course, with no ways to
Yeah,
monitor that
composability
composability, it's
is
very
getting
tough.
bigger and bigger also because people aren't layering and drawing out their attack surface. And then I think that's when real-time monitoring is probably the most impactful too. Like obviously on the proactive side, you have to draw it out, but in the event that one thing shifts on the composability side, you need to be alerted and pause everything quickly,
Yes,
very quickly, like in, milliseconds. And if you don't have that technology in place, you're screwed.
absolutely. So one thing about is by starting a company today in 2025, right, and building security tooling for 2025 versus building it for 2020, the two biggest shifts that I see, and feel free to add to this, is the on-chain ecosystem is so much bigger in 2025 than it was in 2020. Now we've got multiple L1s, multiple L2s, we've got use cases that span beyond just simple decentralized finance instruments and NFTs. So on-chain has really exploded. And then I think AI has also come very far, where you can't even build a company the same way you would build it in 2020 today, both within the company and then in a product. So feel free to run with either, but I'm curious how at Olympics you guys are thinking about both securing 2025's versions of crypto and then also bringing AI into like Web3 security.
Yeah. AI. I have a very strong opinion on this. So Olympix has always been Olympix.ai. Since before ChatGPT, before LMs, we actually used to host our own models. I have never seen or believed that models are going to be a foundation or be a piece of security that you can solely leverage. What do I mean by that? And why am I saying Olympix has AI and I don't believe in it? I don't believe in AI as your sole source of security. I think it can be beneficial in the same way I think it can be beneficial in copywriting and fixing an email. But I'm not going to look at it and just stare at the screen and think it's going to write an email for me, right? I'm going to give it context and allow it to fix it up. So, by the same token, I take, I want to be careful in the way I say it. I just think it's very negligent to use an LLM and create some sort of to communicate that as security posture. Whereas we've seen life or death attack surfaces in the past, and we know the only way to solve for them is formal methods. And if you want to use AI to optimize those results, which is exactly what we do, we say this is a lot of data. We say it's hard for people to digest this. Let's take the result of leveraging formal methods and let's give it to these teams in a digestible way. Fine. Totally fine. In the same
Mhm.
way, like you should use AI to fix up all of your content, but it shouldn't be generating everything from scratch. And so I see it that way. Yeah, I think the future does involve using LMs, but they my chief of staff said this. I think this is a really good way to put it. If you're getting in an airplane, which is again life or death stakes attack surface, do you want to know that the security of that was tested by an LM or by mathematical methods? And I think most people would say mathematical methods. They want some level of certainty. That's how I believe smart contract security should be. And I believe if you want to leverage other tooling for other things, like fine, but when you actually are talking about security ownership, you need to take it very seriously. And you can't just willy nilly take shortcuts. Yeah.
I 100% agree. I think um, it's really remarkable how far LLMs have come, but at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
security is all about life or death, right? The cost of a
Mm-hmm.
bad decision is either users or money in our case. There's quite a few different examples of, LLMs hallucinating or LLMs lacking context. The way I think about it is so far with the era of LLMs that we're in, it feels like you have a really kind of eager and excited intern who's happy to help you with whatever you need. You can delegate a task to them. And I think, we're
Yes.
now
Yes.
that intern is getting more sophisticated. They're going from, let's say, being a high school intern to like a college intern, but they're still not at the point where you want to trust a college intern to, let's say, like give you a boardroom presentation, right? Maybe you want to trust them to prepare some graphics for you, maybe trust them to, go out and do a couple of, interviews for you. But at the end of the day, you're the one who's kind of the architect who's presenting those findings. And that's the question, right? Would you want like the college level intern to come in and do your security for your whole system, or do you want a chief security officer who is relying on people who are relying on that intern, right? So I think security is obviously
Right.
really high stakes.
And I think also, I even think about this, I would never let my team or hire someone who would write any of our backend code using AI. It's just this code is too important. And again, it really depends what you're building, but when you're building security solutions, absolutely not. But if they want to mock up a front end dashboard with AI, live your best life, right? And so it's all just relative. Like many companies today are going to thrive and become billion-dollar companies being LLM wrappers, but that's not going to be in the security space.
I totally agree. I mean, but I think taking the other side of things, we've at Guardrail, we've also been Guardrail.ai since day one. And the reason I
Right.
made that very, very intentional decision back in 2022 was coming from the Web2 security world. Before this, when I was at LinkedIn, we were dealing with incidents day in and day out. My first year at LinkedIn, I dealt with 75 incidents as the first responder. And then on my final year, by the end, we'd done 200 plus incidents. And I just remember the key metric that we were trying to change was how many incidents we were dealing with versus we had an AI kind of categorizing and automatically dealing with. And that number when we started was 25% was AI and 75% was manual. And then when I finished, it was actually 95 AI, 5% manual. And that's a huge unlock because the minute the similar attack vectors are
Right.
coming in and you build an AI model that can, categorize and flag these, the humans can spend their time a lot
Exactly.
more efficiently, right? Absolutely. And that's kind of the holy grail of building systems in this way. Bringing that to crypto, I would say, you know, not necessarily the LLM aspects of things, but more bringing in machine learning. The whole thesis of blockchain being this immutable public ledger. It's not really very effective if you're not able to data engineer, feature engineer on top of that, and then come up with smart decisions. So I've been pretty clear about this from day one. Is we want to start off doing things manually, doing things that don't scale, but somewhere in the 2020 end of 2023, start of 2024. Started building our first AI models off of our own, primarily generated data, and the
Right.
results I think spoke for themselves very quickly. So I would say it's obviously the AI is now also becoming synonymous with LLMs, but if you just think about machine learning and generally AI in terms of security, it's pretty impossible to launch a tool today without doing any kind of automated reasoning like what Olympix is doing and what Guardrail is doing.
100%. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's a piece of the puzzle. It's not the whole puzzle. And I think that's the thing that me and you share in terms of vision and the way we view AI sitting in the security stack, and especially like building the security stack and having that type of responsibility for our clients. It's like we're not just handing you it something that you could get yourself and wrapping it in a different bow, or we're bringing it in as a piece of our puzzle and then wrapping it in a bow.
Exactly. And I like that you mentioned you're still integrating AI into your product. I mean, I'm curious what Olympics, what is your favorite AI feature that you've built? But I would say for us, I can go first, is, every single alert that Guardrail sends out, we actually prefetch some context from the blockchain and add in using blockchain MCP to kind of
Mm-hmm.
explain what happened in that transaction, or even give the user ability to ask questions on a transaction. So we've all been
That's
on
amazing.
Etherscan and seen a transaction and wanted questions like, where did this get funded from? What was the first transaction? And we've kind of made all that really easy to use through a pretty easy to use interface at Guardrail. So that gets me pretty excited. Again, being an incident responder, I wish I had a tool like that. And now we can finally give it to all the teams out there. Yeah, what's an AI
Yeah.
feature at Olympics that you guys use?
I'm tied between two, but I guess I'll tell you about one that's in private alpha, which is we don't actually have a name for it, but it's fuzzing meets formal verification. So essentially, because we have the infra that understands every single code path, is able to bring that up, we're actually able to infer specs and automate parts of formal verification. And I think that's really interesting because, as you know, formal proofs are very important to me. I think they're critical for security to build in this ecosystem, but I also think they were very hard to reach prior to this tool coming out. It is incredible if your team has the capacity to learn a second language and infer the right specs. Hats off to you and do it every time. If that's not the case, kind of the alternate option just comes to like black box fuzzing and you don't it's kind of like it's black or white. So how do we get to kind of like this gray in between zone where you can get some level of mathematical certainty? And that's kind of what AI is enabling us to do. Okay, we have the context of your code. We understand, different fuzzing strategies, what could and could not go wrong. And now we can infer what kind of specs should be in place and then actually apply them. So it's like single touch formal verification essentially, and I think that's a huge unlock, and I think it's also applicable to many industries. Like it would be really interesting to see this applied to autonomous vehicles, to drone technology. There's so much where this would be important, and where formal methods are a little bit outdated and could use a little AI optimization. So from a technology standpoint, I just think it's probably the most interesting use case. But we also have user helpful interfaces of AI that are similar to what you described, where it's like, we're like, if you could ask your code base one question, what would that be? Or a few questions. And let's say they'll be like, in what ways can money leave or enter this code base? In what ways what could go wrong? And it sounds stupid, but these questions, they don't actually know the answer, and they wish they had an auditor just sitting on staff to answer all these questions for them after reviewing the code. And Olympix is able to do that because, again, it has the infrastructure and understanding of the code, not just the context, but every single code path, how everything interacts with each other, on-chain data, right? There's so much there that AI can help, like I said, optimize and give you clear answers and opportunity to understand.
I love that. I mean, it's such a double-edged sword, right? You want to automate and help your your customers as much as you can with as many, agentic flows as you can. But at the same time, these agentic flows, hallucinate. They don't have the best ground truth. And really, they're
Right.
asking tough questions, right? They're not asking simple questions like which field in this response corresponds to something they're thinking. They're looking for reasoning, right? So it's obviously a very challenging. I'm very curious to check back in on this conversation in 12 months time and see what we're able to get done with Olympix and with Guardrail, bringing in the agentic kind of AI flows. I guess switching gears a bit and thinking about what's coming up next for both of us. It's crazy to think we're on the tail end of 2025 already. And just about as we get into the last couple months of 2025, starting 2026. Um, what do you think um, this version of protocols is really kind of contending with when it comes to security? What is the next attack vector that if you're launching today? I think you touched on this a little bit, but if I'm launching a new DeFi app today, how should I be thinking about this entering 2026?
Yeah, I think me and you both share the same sentiment here, composability. The more things are being innovated in this space, the more we're wanting to interact and work with each other as protocols, as builders, right? And I see this in so many of my customers, I'm sure you too, but thinking about every single piece of risk you're introducing in doing so, and having that not just mapped out but accounted for in different testing methodologies. Perhaps now this means you need to test more rigorously. Perhaps this means you need to actually not just implement the real-time security, but also create kind of specs and rules around what could go wrong and have like automated response mechanisms put in place as well. So it's just kind of an evolution of how what you should be doing, just that next step to next layer to it. So like you already should be testing pretty rigorously, but now you should be not just also mapping out like the additional attack vectors and testing each of those. You already should be implementing real-time monitoring, but now you should be also, creating rules and specs around automated switch off mechanisms, stuff like that. So I think that's becoming more and more prevalent. I don't know what you've seen on your side.
Yeah, I would say a big plus one to using more to achieve that goal, because I think the biggest thing is there's just many more options today for security than there were 2 years ago. And they're all not getting more expensive. In fact, they're getting cheaper, right? So if you're a
Yeah.
user, you're launching, do your homework, do your own research. That's our favorite quote in this space, but I would say do your own research, try out all the tools out there to make sure that you're not leaving any low-hanging fruit on the table for attackers, or you're not kind of feeling secure when you're not. And I think there's a bunch of tools out there that are really good bang for your buck. I think Olympix is one of them, Guardrail is one of them. There's a whole suite of different formal methods and testing methods that everyone should be employing. And been having been a security advisor for a couple of protocols, I think the smartest thing to do is start very small and incremental versus kind of thinking we're just going to do security all at once we're done building, because it's a lot harder once multi-sigs are set up, access control roles are assigned, money starts flowing on chain. Now I regularly talk to teams that say once we hit X amount of millions or billions in TVL, like we're gonna invest more in security. And unfortunately, not a lot of them even reach that next phase because of an access control issue or a hack that ends up leaving them high and dry. So I think start small.
Billion EQ, right?
Yeah, and the other thing which I love is there's so many frameworks out there these days, because when we were starting in the space in 2020, 2022, finding a list of vulnerabilities was always hard, and you'd find read-only reentrancy, you'd find like maybe a list of 5 attack vectors. But today there is a lot of open source intelligence available to formalize the security function and then use tools where you want to not get your hands dirty. So I would say starting small, incremental, and like using frameworks off the shelf is going to be really huge. And like try out as many products as you can in security. Spend a couple of days in a week just implementing some of these tools and seeing what they can catch, because you'd rather do that versus be in a war room dealing with multiple millions at risk.
Right, 100%.
Amazing. Is there an ecosystem or part of crypto that you're very excited about? This is my last question, then I'll let you go.
I'm really excited for the Fortune 500 wave to actually take off. And what I mean by that is there is subsequent budget in majority of these companies, but it's all experimentation pretty much. There's very little that's actually going out of testnet, like onto a public chain. And I'm excited to see what the wave when it happens and what happens from these larger, you know, tech giants who historically have just operated in the Web2 space, who are kind of realizing the future is on chain and we're going to need to begin experiment and soon deploying. So I'm curious to see two things. One, like what do they deploy, and two, how do they do it? I think that's a question that's plaguing a lot of our minds because that's going to be such a big mover for the industry. I mean, it's already a huge vote of confidence that they all have those budgets and are allocating serious resources to experimentation, but experimentation is very different than implementation, and that implementation will be a very exciting way for all of us.
Mm, that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. For me, I'm thinking about this. I would say the payment space feels so ready to change in this next decade. Thinking
Mm-hmm.
about when we grew up, there used to be, xe.com, westernunion.com, and that already felt like an advancement for, let's say, remittance and global payments. This upcoming generation, they haven't grown up with really large bid and ask spreads. They're not walking around with cash. So I think building things in a stable coin native way, payment native way, is super, super interesting. Marrying that with the fact that we're seeing, the Mr. Beasts and huge creators kind of really build a brand that's converting into like real dollars. We've watched that happen in the last couple of years now. What does the next version of, e-commerce creator coins look like when you've got, Twitch streamers that are all, launching their own currencies, launching their own creator coins? So I think that this whole space is so ripe for disruption because at the end of the day, it's all about bottom line, right? And today there's just
Yeah.
so many huge margins from Ticketmaster to payments to e-commerce. So I would say like, yeah, payments and
And
in
social.
social,
Yeah.
exactly. I'm
There's
super, super
applications.
bullish and interested in seeing how that shapes up outside of security, which is obviously our day jobs.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. Actually, I experienced something that I've heard people talk about before. Yesterday, I got banned from LinkedIn, probably because my posts are
Okay,
too good.
that's juicy. Tell us more.
It's juicy. Right? Yeah, no, I think I've just been posting an aggressive amount. I don't really know what triggered it. I got back on. But this is something creators talk about a lot, right? So the creator economy is huge. There's so many individuals now who make majority of their household income from creator earnings, and being wiped in one instance by a centralized source, Instagram, TikTok, etc., is catastrophic to their livelihood, to their income, right? And so I think there's going to be a large emergence of on-chain socials, and I'm waiting
Mm-hmm.
for that to really kick off. I know there's been experimentation and a bit of movement, but I'm waiting to see what that first real wave looks like with actual huge audience creators onboarding, because when you live in that fear of one centralized entity to can wipe me at any minute, and it's happened to a few of these big creators before, it's scary, and they're going to be very quick to be able to move, and especially when they'll be able via contracts to monetize all of their views and not have the policies change via what the centralized authority says. Like, okay, today TikTok's policy is I take 10%, tomorrow it's 20, right? And that can just inch up, and their following and everything is built on there, like when they have the autonomy and control. I think it's an interesting take. I'm not so big on the creator economy. It's just I feel like the use cases are just endless in every domain. Like one day it's payments I'm hearing about, one day it's RWA, one day it's, mortgages, one day it's creator economy. There's just everything can be on chain, and there are benefits
Mm-hmm.
everywhere. And so again, I say this, my mind is always blown by what my customers are doing. Half of it I don't even understand. When they explain it a little deeper and I understand the benefit, I'm like, okay, that makes sense why it's better than the traditional way of doing it. And so that's why I'm so curious what the next wave of use cases is. I think payments is obvious and it'll happen. It'll happen. It's already happening. And it's just going to
Mm-hmm.
double down. But like, what are the other things that you haven't thought about? And that's what's really cool and fun about building infrastructure. And everyone thinks it's not sexy, but I think it's the sexiest thing in the world to be able to enable everyone to build what the next generation will like thrive on. And
Yeah.
that's so freaking cool.
Yeah, you're essentially paving the road that's going to connect cities, and then from there, who knows what's going to happen in those cities, right? People can build businesses, people can build stores, but kind of need the road to connect them, and I think that's really exciting about what both of us are building. I love it. Well, this has been really, really interesting, exciting. I really enjoyed it. So thanks so much, Connie, for sitting with us and
It's
chatting with
always
us
good
on
to you.
um, all things security.